Alright, so for this video we're looking at doing some oil pastel work, and this is a sort of just set a little grouping of flowers here. I've put down very lightly, just sketching in very lightly with a pencil. You don't want to get too dark with any pencil sketches with this, because if you do, then your pastels will pick them up and kind of pull the graphite through with the pastel. So you want to keep this work, your pencil work, very light, and just kind of use it as a guide if you put any down at all. I've got this down just to help, because mine is more of a demonstration of the just coloring with the oil pastel. But you can go through and do it without the sketch and paint more directly, like you were using a brush or something. So consider this my underpainting, if you will, for the pastel work. And to go ahead and get started, I've got to decide on my colors here, and so I think I'll go with sort of an orange-yellow blend on the flowers, and then maybe use some greenish blues for the leaf work and stuff, and I'll kind of decide about the background once I get to it. Obviously, it'll be something that'll work with the sort of yellow-orange color of the flowers. All right, so I've got my pastels, and what I'm going to do is kind of start with that central area, and just very lightly go through, and I'm putting one layer of color down at a time here. Usually when I work with pastels, and when I talk to students about it, I talk about working in layers. I don't want to do everything all at once. I do not want the paper to get saturated with the pastel, in case I want to go through and add more color to it. So what I do with this is go through and just put down my initial colors, and then as I come through, and I'll put either add more of that color or start putting some blending and things in. So like for these, I'm wanting them in two-tone. So when I'm having them sort of blend out from the red area. And so I'm just kind of putting this down in one layer first. Now, again, I'm leaving room to add more color. All right. And so I don't want to saturate the paper here with the first layer, and I want to leave more room to do some blending and things like that. Now, these are sort of your basic level of pastel. These are not your pro grade, but even working with my students at school, it's usually been just pretty good, just using the basic levels to learn how to blend and make everything work like you might want it to. All right, and then kind of got this little sort of bud situation I've got kind of going on over here. So I'll kind of throw some color there. All right, so that's kind of a first level for those colors. Let's go through and get some of the yellow put in now. And when I do the yellow, I'll kind of start letting it overlap a little bit. Now the paper I'm on is just a typical sketchbook paper. And so it's a basic drawing paper. So just for instance, you can see how with the graphite here, it's kind of picked up a little bit of the color. And I'll just kind of go back and clean that up a little bit. Sort of make everything blend. All right, so now to go through and start kind of blending in here on the second layer and smoothing out my oranges. And again, I'm using the yellow to do this. And same thing here, go through. And this bears down a little bit more to add this sort of second blending layer in, if you will. When I talk to students about doing this, I always tell them you need at least 2 layers down of pastel before you really have enough pastel to move around to blend. One thing to be aware of is you can see these little pieces that are kind of picking up here on the pastel, if you start getting a lot of those, then either you're pushing down hard, which, may be needed, maybe not. But also it could be that your paper is starting to get saturated. So I'm just going back with the yellow here and using it to kind of blend everything in. And so we kind of get the first flower kind of there. And then let's go down here, start working on the second one. And again, we've got the yellow here. I'm going to wipe off the pastel briefly. If the pastel gets too gunked up with the other color, then you can just wipe it off with a paper towel and kind of clean it up a little bit. Just rub it in there just like you're coloring. All right, come back. There's this one. All right, and so I'm letting it pick up the orange and kind of pull it in a little bit to the yellow. Trying to get some of that sort of faded blending look going. All right, picked up a little bit of the red, so it's going to make more orange. Which helps kind of give it some of the veining effect through some of the leaves, or petals in this case. All right, so there's the initial work on the two flowers. Got a few pieces here and there I really need to kind of clean up or blend in. Don't necessarily like having all these little pieces around, but oh well. All right, and then come over here to the bloom. Go ahead and grab some of it. There's some color there. All right, that part's done. Now, with this central section, I got some red, I got some orange, but I'm going to go ahead and throw a little bit of brown here on top of this. I'm trying to be careful not to stir up too much, because I will start actually picking up pastel at this point. So I'm just trying to add a little bit of color on top, sort of separate it out a little bit more. And then I'll come through with like a dark brown. Just kind of throw some extra sort of shading on one side. And then I can grab that sort of light brown again. Kind of come out with my petals. It's just kind of accenting a little bit. Let me get some more separation in there. All right, so there's those flowers there. And now to start on the greenery. Grab another type of pastel here. Again, I'm using two different types, but they're both basic, sort of store brand, if you will, pastels. Or just, very much the learning, sort of the learning level, academic level. All right, so I'm just putting a light green down here. That's kind of my base color. And again, that first layer should look, if you think about it, the first layer should look kind of like a bad coloring job because you're leaving space in there to add more pastel. And so that's what I've kind of done here. And then I'll go through and come back down one side. Start adding in some other color here. All right, now this is a whole bud, so I'm going to go ahead and catch the whole thing. Go ahead and let it blend everything in. And then we get some variation there. All right. And let's see. Let's go ahead and grab some of this really dark. I'm going to say this is the sort of shadow side here. Go through and add some of this more bluish green in. I guess if this were painting would call it phthalo green. Let that blend on down here. And then let's start working on some of these leaves. These leaves are pretty much going to be, make them a different green so they'll kind of stand out. And so these, I'm just going to go ahead and start rotating my oil pastel around as I work. Go ahead and try to get a decent amount of coverage on the first pass. This paper is not as heavy as what I normally use when I'm dealing with pastel. This is a sketchbook that I'm using to do this in, just for example. And so the paper is not going to hold as much pastel as I'm normally used to. You can tell it starts gliding along really quick. When you're coloring with the pastel, you'll feel that, you'll go from feeling resistance on paper to feeling it really kind of glide along. When you're doing that, then you're just coloring on top of existing pastel. And so then you have to be careful not to start picking up too much of it and basically getting these little pastel pieces everywhere. All right, so there's a leaf outline there. Let's go ahead and catch this one as well. And so I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to start sort of making these leaves kind of variegated as well. Let them kind of get a two-tone look to them. Kind of this one has kind of a shadow on the bottom. So kind of go along and see about doing that. All right, go ahead and catch this one. All right, and one thing about this is whichever direction you color the first layer in, when you come back with the second layer and you're trying to add some different color, and even for blending purposes, you want to go a different direction. As I tell my students, if your pastel didn't pick up that spot of paper the first time, chances are when you come back through the next time, it's not really going to pick it up then either, unless you just start bearing down like really hard. All right, so you want to, whatever direction you color the first time, you want to kind of change direction the next time so you can really start filling in those white spots that will appear in the paper. So that's kind of what I'm doing here. All right, now I know this is going to have a darker spot underneath, and then it will have some that comes down, sort of wraps from the top. So we'll see if we can't pull off that look. And then the same thing for this. This is going to be like the rest of them. That's going to kind of come out. And I'm just going to kind of blend that one in. All right, so what I want to do is grab my light green back and come back over this darker one a little bit. Kind of soften up these initial edges, and again, I'm going to change direction from the layer I just put down. So I can just kind of get some general blending going on. And at least for this example, you're going to see the pencil lines are still going to kind of be there. This pastel's not putting it on really heavy enough to take out the pencil lines, so you would either want to not use pencil at all, and just do this with straight pastel. Or to go very, very light. Now, I know in my little video screen I'm looking at over here, this seems like it might be showing up a bit lighter than what I've got right here in front of me. This is I'm trying to play around with some lighting on this to make things look a little bit better, but it's going to be a work in progress there. All right, so coming through again, blending these greens in, and then I'm going to go ahead and sort of finish off the leafing. All right, now part of what's happened here is my not my veins, but my stems here have kind of gone away a little bit. And so what I'm going to do is I've got a sort of cobalt green here. Just going to go through and make these stems darken up a bit completely, so that maybe I can get a little bit more contrast there. All right. And so the other thing I can do is on the leaves here, I can try to go through and basically just overlay a sort of vein line into the pastel that's there, and so you at least have that sort of effect going. I think I can go around the outside bottom portion of these. Gonna put in a sort of shadow line for the edge. All right. Now, let's see what needs to be cleaned up a little bit. Right through here. Wrong green. So go right through here. Make more of a mess there. There we go. So some of this I'm getting to the point where it's going to start picking up more than it's blending around. So my paper's getting pretty well full here as far as pigment goes. All right, so there's the flower portion. And I've got this to a point where, I just have what kind of background do I want on this? What color do I want to use? And so given all this, I think I'll probably just go with a basic sort of a bluish background. And again, when I do it, I'm going to have to be careful not to get too carried away. So I definitely want to do this one in probably 1 to 2 layers of pastel, because I'm not going to get a lot of room to work with as far as the coloration here. So I'm just looking at a couple of these. Got kind of a slate, I'll say slate blue color here, so I'll probably try to use some of it. And then I'm having to peel some of the wrapper off. All right. So I've got a couple of colors here I'll try to work in. Now, one thing is I've got this sort of yellow-orange color here. I got to be careful that if the blue hits the yellow, it's going to turn green. And, of course, if it hits the orange, it's going to turn brown. But I do want them to kind of overlap just a little to clean up these edges. All right. So again, I'm not going to bear down super hard on this part. except just along the edges, because I don't want to saturate my paper until I have all the color on here that I want. Right. So I'll get this to a level, and then I'll come back and add a second color just to get some interest going. Go ahead and outline some of this. Now, if you really, are doing something like this and you just totally mess up with some of the color, you can kind of go back with a blade, like an X-Acto knife or something like that. You can try to scrape some of it off and do some recoloring. But whatever you do at this point, the paper is going to be stained with the oil. So there'll only be so much that can be done to do corrections if need be. So usually the best case is just try to make it work. And that way you're just having some happy accidents, I guess, rather than the mistakes. Alright, so we'll go with this. Come on the inside carefully. Alright, so there's that part. Now what I'm going to do, this is kind of a mid-tone color here for blue. And so I'm going to come back through some areas with some darker blue. And then I'm going to come back through some of the outer edges here and use a lighter blue to do some blending. Alright. So this is, like I said, the way I usually color with oil pastels. It's a multi-layer process just to try to leave room to make those color decisions as I'm working. Alright, go ahead and do some here. Finish this part up. Alright, so there's the initial color for the background. And now to go through, let me grab some of this dark blue here. And in these sort of central areas, and we'll go through and put down the dark blue and smooth things out a little bit with it. And I do intend for this to be the final layer of color. So I'm bearing down a little bit harder than I was on the first layer. And then also trying to make sure I go some different directions here to fill in the gaps of the white. All right. There's that one. Let's see, come down here. Make sure to be moving around a bit. All right, if you're not used to coloring with oil pastels, one thing too is because you're having to bear down and change angles and things like that, you might find your hands getting a bit tired as you work. So you may have to do this where you've kind of taken some breaks after some of your blending sessions and maybe doing it in a couple of sessions instead of just one. As always, I would tell people, take your time, especially if you're learning and trying to figure out some techniques. I mean, I'm still learning stuff all the time about how to do some of this stuff. So, try different things, watch some videos, and kind of see what's going on with everybody. But part of that is learning techniques is getting all the movements and things like that down. All right, so there's my initial sort of darker area of blue, and now I'm going to come back with this light blue and blend that from the outside. And you can see I'm starting to kind of pick up some of those pretty big spots sometimes where it gets a glob of the oil pastel. All right. And here, go ahead and do some of this down here. All right. Well, come on around the edge. All right. So pick up some of these little pieces and get them rubbed in. Come back over that with a little bit of orange or something. All right, so I got my flowers. I got most, not all of my little spots, but some of these you want to come back in and try to clean stuff up a little bit, maybe. Once you get enough pastel down, you can try some different things as far as blending and moving it around the paper. I usually prefer to just do everything with the pastels. Use different colors to come back and do blending and stuff like that. But again, with any pastel blending, you have to make sure you have enough pastel on the paper to do that. So this is my little rendition of coloring with some pastel. You can see maybe, like right through here, you can see some of the little pieces that get picked up. I just try to kind of either dab them with my finger or take a pastel back and blend them in. Different ways you can do that. And I've got a lot of pastel down on here, but I know my stems are still, being a little bit stubborn about showing up the way they're supposed to. So I'm actually going to grab just a little purple and kind of throw that down on here. Give it some texture and lines and stuff. All right, so the green is still there. The purple's in here. And the same thing for some of this underneath portion. I think I'm going to pull some purple in to go ahead and do some shadow here. That's what I kind of had intended from the start. All right, so that way, with the very light purple around the outside here. So this is with any color, you don't really want to use like a pure black or a pure white, if you can help it, because both of those are like, their purest form, so they're always going to wipe everything else out. If I were to use black for this, that's as dark as I can go, like immediately, and you don't want to do that necessarily right from the start. You want to have some room to get more intense. So that's why you don't see a lot of artists when they're doing their shading and stuff. They'll use different colors, blues, things like that to make their blacks or make their shadows. instead of using the black. So that's just something to keep in mind as you're working with some of this. All right. So I think this is where I'm going to, well, let me go back before I get too carried away. Let me go ahead and get this line kind of cleaned up there. I'm going to get that line kind of cleaned up there. All right. Well, this is my demo for today, and hopefully you get something out of this. Again, these are oil pastels. These are just some that I picked up at the store. These are the sort of academic grade, if you will. So they're probably a little bit harder than what your pro grade would be. The paper is only about a probably 40, 50 pound drawing paper. It does not have a lot of tooth to it. So that's one reason why after about 2 layers or so, this is kind of full as far as pastel, sort of saturated. So just a couple of things to keep in mind here, and hopefully you enjoyed this, and I'll have another one here soon.